injuries due to blunt force trauma.
Postmortem is gone very well. We have the report, and as I said, the 3 pathologists have concurred on the report. So that is just stage 1. It does not answer the many other questions that we've been raising.
All right, moving on, the Ethics and the Anti-Corruption Commission, that is the EACC, has warned motorists and security officers against engaging in corruption on Kenyan roads, especially during the festive season when travel has increased across the country. Now, speaking in Boni, Makueni County, during the burial of Dixon Kieti, the brother of the late former Rift Valley Regional Commissioner Wilfred Ndolo, EACC Western Kenya Regional Director Eric Ngombi said the commission will deploy officers along major highways to curb bribery and traffic law violations that endanger the lives of travelers.
Tuwachunge wale abiria ambao tunabeba. Hakuna haja wewe unafanya makosa, unabeba gari ambayo inabeba watu kupita kiasi, kisha unatoa hongo ili uweze kukwepa sheria na hatimaye unaua watu. Kwa hivyo mtindo huo ambapo madereva wengi are driving people to death unatakiwa ukomeshwe. Na hili jambo hili lifanyike, lazima kila mshikadau atekeleze wajibu wake. Wakati asasi hizi zinatekeleza majukumu haya, inatakiwa ikumbukwe kwamba pia wananchi ni baadhi ya wale washikadau ambao wana jukumu kubwa ya kuzipunguza zile ajali ambazo zinatokea katika barabara zetu na kusababisha vifo vya watu wengi wakiwe.
All right, moving on, the Kitui County government, in partnership with road safety stakeholders, has launched a 3-day public sensitization campaign aimed at promoting compliance to traffic laws and reducing road accidents. The campaign, dubbed Operations Fika Salama Uhai Kwanza, targets drivers and all road users with a special focus on the Christmas festive season when travel volumes are high. Now, the initiative comes amid a surge in road accidents and fatalities across the country, largely blamed on overspeeding, driver negligence and disregarded for traffic regulations. Authorities say the campaign seeks to ensure that all travelers reach their destinations safely during the festive period.
Tumeanzisha rasmi our road safety campaign program ambayo ni ya siku 2, na tuko several departments ama several stakeholders wa road safety. Tuko na polisi, tuko na NTSA, tuko na Kena, tuko na County Government of Kitui and Road Safety Authority Committee na wahusika wengi. The main aim ya hii exercise ya leo ni kuhakikisha kwamba sisi kama wahusika wakuu katika usalama barabarani tunaongea na wananchi wetu, tunaongea na madereva wetu kuhakikisha kwamba wakati huu wa msimu wa sikukuu tumekuwa makini sana kwa barabara. We tried as much as possible to reduce the number of accidents during this Eve season. Operesheni Fika Salama Uhai Kwanza.
Wakati wanatumia barabara, either driver ama mwananchi wa kawaida, you must observe traffic rules. Gari unataka kubeba mizigo mingi, usibebe kwa sababu hiyo inachangia. Tunasema ukiwa town kuna ile areas unaambiwa kama zebra crossing, pita hapo. Si kila mahali. Hata wakati uko na gari unabeba abiria ama unaendesha, ile speed overspeeding, overtaking, please do away with that. Tunataka hii msimu ya Christmas watu washerekee kwa furaha, si kusherehekea kwa sababu ya watu wanaenda kusindikiza wenzao kwa sababu ya outcomes ya accidents.
Right now, the National Liberal Party leader Augustus Muli has criticized what he terms the deliberate and development of the Ukambani region, accusing national leaders of perpetuating poverty politics and trading political barbs at the expense of the citizens. Muli says both President William Ruto and former Vice President Kalonzo Musyoka share responsibility for the region's stagnation, arguing that the duel between the duo is a distraction from the real issue. issues. He added that Ukambani residents feel the region has been designed despite its significant electoral weight.
The development in Ukambani has been deliberate. We've deliberately been left poor and underdeveloped so that the politicians can do what they are doing now. They can accuse each other, they can blame each other, then they come and ask for our support. But this time we want to say no. Poverty too, sababu ya wale viongozi tuko nao ambao they care nothing, they care nil, zero about the development of the...
Right, moving on, President William Ruto has reaffirmed that the contested Migingo Island falls within Kenya territory. He warned security forces from neighboring countries against harassing Kenyan fishermen. Speaking during the 5th edition of the Pinyi Luo Festival in Migori County, the president said his administration will pursue all available means to resolve the Migingo boundary dispute. Now, he added that the Ministry of Foreign Affairs will engage diplomatic channels to ensure the row over Migingo is settled once and for all.
Mimi nilikubaliana na nyinyi vile party leader wetu amesema, vile governor wa hapa amesema, vile governor wa Siaya amesema, vile governor wa Wanga amesema, hii Migingo ni sehemu ya Kenya, na tumekubaliana ya kwamba hiyo Migingo kwa sababu ni sehemu ya Kenya, tutahakikisha ya kwamba hiyo sehemu kwa mbinu zote, mbinu za diplomasia na mbinu zingine zote, tutahakikisha kwamba wananchi wetu hawaangaishwi na askari wa nchi zingine. Tunataka kuhakikisha kwamba kuna amani, tuweze kufanya biashara, ndio Kenya iweze kusonga mbele.
Right now, the health sector is facing a looming crisis as clinical officers across the country have threatened to down their tools effective from Tuesday, 23rd December of 2025, if a collective bargaining agreement is not signed and implemented. Now, the Kenya Union of Clinical Officers Chairperson Peterson Wachira has criticized Health Cabinet Secretary, that is Edin Duale, for failing to sign the agreement for 3 months. Speaking in Nakuru, Wachira noted that efforts to hold consultations with the Ministry of Health have yielded no results. KUSO officials maintain that previous agreements and court orders have not been honored, leaving the clinical officers with no option but to strike.
This is a strike that has been necessitated purely by the government officer, and specifically the county governments and the Ministry of Health, because of their laxity. And especially, I must say today, that we are really disappointed with the Ministry of Health, and especially with our CS Duale.
The only way out is just to go on strike so that the Ministry of Health and the COG can come in together and give us our CBA, and also the 3rd and 4th cycle of the SRC payments. I think the county needs to look on that.
Right now, the Elimu organization has urged the government to urgently address challenges affecting the education sector ahead of the schools reopening next year. Now, speaking to the media, the organization cited a shortage of teachers, delays in the disbursement of government capitation per learner, and data challenges linked to the NEMIS systems as key issues that need immediate intervention. In its latest report on the state of education, the Elimu also called on the Ministry of Education to step up sensitization of parents on the senior school education system, which is set to roll out next year. The organization noted that the pioneer cohort under the competency-based education model is expected to report on January 12th of 2026, adding that many parents still lack clear understanding of KGCSE results and the appropriate education pathways for their children.
National deficit exceeds 100,000. with critical gaps in ASAL areas or region, hard to staff schools, and specifically if we're talking about subjects, STEM subjects. And on this particular matter, we are saying that recruitment must remain the preserve of Teacher Service Commission. We call for the accelerated grade 9 classroom infrastructure construction, because that construction, there are some few areas that did not entirely complete it. And
All right, moving on, the drought situation in Kajiado County is expected to worsen as failed rains continue to hit the region hard. Hundreds of pastoralists have been forced to abandon their homes and migrate to other regions in search of water and pasture, with Kajiado Central and Kajiado West among the worst affected areas. But the National Drought Management Authority has classified Kajiado as a drought hotspot, with over 64,000 people facing food insecurity. Vast rangelands remain burdened due to the failed living families and livestock vulnerable.
Wanyamapori ni wetu, wakati wanapitia sehemu zetu za maji tuwapatie maji, na hata wakati wanashare lishe na mifugo zetu, mujue hawa wanyamapori ni zetu pia, so tusiwaumize, tuwapatie njia.
Tunahangaika hapa, watoto sikianda shule sijitaenda nani, chakula kukula ni taabu. Tunaenda sisi ni maboroka, tunaenda kutafuta kati kwa soko, saa nyingine tunakosa jung'ombe mekonda, tunakuja na mkono tu, hata mafuta ya magari.
Right, due to the ongoing severe drought affecting large parts of the country, more than 20 counties or the counties are now facing a worsening humanitarian situation that requires urgent intervention. Now speaking during the launch of women empowerment projects and the distribution of relief food in Majembeni, Lamu County, Public Service, Human Capital Development and Special Programs Cabinet Secretary, that is Geoffrey Roko, said the government has put in place measures to mitigate the impacts of the drought. Says Roko added that the government plans to distribute livestock feeds to support pastoralists and protect their livelihoods during the prolonged spell. Meanwhile, Lamu County Women Rep Monica Marubu said development projects will continue to be implemented to support vulnerable families as calls grow for coordinated national action to address the drought crisis.
And also the private companies or private sector katika taifa letu la Kenya, tuhakikishe ya kwamba hakuna Mkenya yeyote ambaye ameathirika na kiangazi ambaye atarara njaa. Vile vile tuhakikishe kwamba mifugo yetu inapata chakula na maji, na tunajua rais kupitia wizara ya fedha anaweka pesa ya kuhakikisha hiyo maneno yote inazingatiwa. Ndio maana tumeweza kupata chakula ambao tuko nayo.
All right, now hundreds of families in Kilifi County are facing starvation as a prolonged drought bites following failed rains. Residents in the hardest hit areas including Ganze, Magarini and Kaloleni are forced to travel long distances in search of water as ponds and dams have dried up. Now, the Kenya Red Cross says more than 600 families have been impacted and Red Cross officials have started distributing food aid to those affected. Now, Margaret Kalama, Assistant Chief of Kirimani sublocation, warned that the situation is dire, with residents depending on well wishes for food, and called on the national and county governments to intervene before the crisis worsens.
Na bamba kilomita kama 12 hivi kuchota maji, kwa sababu hapa sarani kwetu maji yamekauka.
Maji huwa haiishi, inashikana, lakini sai venye mvua haikunyesha ile kubwa ni kama imefeli. Kwa hivyo tunaomba sai maji tunaifuata umbali wa kilomita 15 kupata maji, na venye tunaona kiangazi ni kama itazidi kuendelea. Kwa hivyo tunaomba hata kama ni kupata zile watabuza ziwe zitatusaidia kwa hilo jambo hilo.
Hapa tunashukuru ni kwa sababu ukame umetufinya sana. Mvua haikunyesha, hakuna maji. Wananchi hapa wanategemea kilimo na hawakuwa na mazao kwa mashamba yao, na hata kwa wakati huu pia hawataraji kupata chochote kwa mashamba yao. Kwa hivyo tunaomba wahisani popote mlipo, mwe mkikumbuka kuna hii eneo iko na shida kwa ajili ya kwamba watu wametegemea tu kilimo ya mvua kutoka kwa Mwenyezi Mungu, halafu na mifugo ndo mapato.
Now, a coalition of elders in Embu County is calling on the Judicial Service Commission to expand representation in the county's court uses committee. The elders, led by Andrew Ireri of the Kiama Kya Nyangi Embu Ndiriri cultural group, say excluding community leaders from cultural youth and women's groups undermines the court's purpose. Now, they warn that without proper representation, local concerns related to the courts are often poorly addressed, leading to unresolved grievances.
Kuna kamati ambaye inaitwa Court User Committee, na Court User Committee iko katika sheria ya Judicial Service Commission Act Section 34. Hiyo ndio inaonyesha 35 ndio inaonyesha mahakama kutakuwa na kamati. Kila pahali kutakuwa na kamati. Kuna county level kutakuwa na kamati ya Court User Committee. Na wakati nilijua hivyo, niliandika barua kuitisha listi ya members wa Court User Committee katika county level. Wale niliona hapo ni maofisa peke yake. Na maofisa wakiitwa kwa mkutano, hakuna moja anatanja shinda ambaye amepata kutoka kwa mwananchi. Sasa hapo ni kuongea tu mambo hili wanaongea, alafu allowance anapata, lakini community hakuna representative. Tungetaka Chief Justice ahakikishe community ya Embu County na community zile zingine zimehusishwa kwa Court User Committee.
Now, police officers in Garissa town have impounded suspected contraband fuel and arrested one person believed to be involved in the transportation of the illicit petroleum products allegedly from neighboring Somalia. Authorities say the suspect was found in possession of more than 60 jerrycans of petrol with an estimated market value of over 200,000 shillings, which was being sold illegally on the outskirts of the town. Now, the fuel was being transported in a Toyota Probox that was intercepted by security officers following a tip-off from members of the public. Garissa County Commissioner Mohamed Mwabunzo, who led the operation, warned motorists against using illicit fuel, saying it poses serious risks as it has not undergone any quality inspection. Now, he added that security agencies will continue with sustained operations to curb the illegal fuel trade, emphasizing that the government is intensifying the fight against contraband goods. The arrest comes barely a week after the same security team closed 2 outlets in Garissa town operating in the same business.
Haya yote yana thamani nafikiri takriban ya zaidi ya $200,000. Yanauziwa wakazi wa Garissa wenye magari madogo madogo. Mafuta haya ni ya petroli. Kwa hivyo yanauziwa watu wa pikipiki, tuk-tuk na zile gari ndogo Altos na zile Probox nyingine ambazo zinafanya taksi. Tumeweza kutahadharisha wale wahusika wa biashara hii kwamba sisi kama kamati ya usalama na multi agency yote kwa jumla hatutapumzika hadi tuhakikishe kwamba biashara hii imefika kikomo. Mafuta haya yote yana thamani nafikiri takriban ya.
Alright, that particular story takes us on our first breather here on Morning Live, but when we come back, we're going to tell you what exactly the newspapers are saying. Don't go too far.
This
All right, welcome back to the program. My name is Martin Macharia. This is Morning Live. Now let's take a look on what's making headlines on the dailies today. And I'm having the Daily Nation newspaper and the Standard newspaper dated today, the 18th day of December 2025. Now let's kick it off with the Daily Nation newspaper. And top story on the Daily Nation newspaper this particular morning, a story that has been making headlines since the former member of parliament, that is Jirongo, died. And, some group of people actually came up and said, his death was, had some queries, right? And, yesterday, the family, they had a post-mortem examination to the body of the late MP, that is Jirongo. Of course, the family had their pathologist and, of course, the state's pathologist. And the Daily Nation says some of the queries that were there, the Daily Nation has highlighted there with why did Jirongo drive towards Naivasha? Have police questioned persons Jirongo interacted with last before he left Karen? And why is the bus company reluctant to make public the passenger manifest? And where are other witnesses, particularly passengers, to collaborate the bus driver's account? And why have the police not recorded statements from them? Right? Of course, it is evident that when the news made headlines to newsrooms, we actually saw, rather we had the views of the driver who was the bus driver who accounted his story to the media, but we didn't hear from the passengers. Now the queries began there. Now the family spokesperson says autopsy report does not answer all the questions. That's the family spokesperson actually saying that. Now the pathologist concluded serious injuries to the chest, abdomen, and spine due to blunt force trauma caused the death of politician Cyrus Jirongo, but questions still linger about the circumstances of the fatal road accident given conflicting accounts. Now that's a particular story on page 4. Let's take a look on that on page 4 and 5 of the Daily Nation this particular morning. And the purpose of Jirongo's drive towards Naivasha, investigators' refusal to make public CCTV footage of the crash silence from 67 passengers in the Climax Coaches bus that crashed into the former MP's cars, and the handling of the accident scene have for close to a week triggered speculations on his cause of death. Now, the government pathologist Johansen Odur and his colleagues hired by Jirongo's family and friends, Dr. Joseph Ndongo, Dr. Bernard and Dr. Martin Wanyoike, on Wednesday said the injuries that claimed Jirongo's life were consistent with the car crash. Now, the postmortem examination report was the wind that would power the sails of the DCI, which on Tuesday initiated a probe into Jirongo's death. Now, in a statement, the DCI said it had interviewed Mr. Teras Kamau Gidenji, the Climax Coaches driver whose vehicle crashed into the Jirongo's and staff from the Eagle petrol station that the former MP exited moments before the collision. Of course, you may have seen the CCTV footage of the last moments of Jirongo, entering the petrol station, the Eagles petrol station that is in Naivasha, and of course exiting that particular petrol station and heading towards the wrong direction. And it is there in the public domain. Of course, the pathologist, the family pathologist, and of course the government's pathologist, Dr. Johansen Odur, yesterday conducted a postmortem examination and said that injuries, chest injuries and abdomen injuries claimed Jirongo's life following the fatal crash earlier this week, right? And moving on to some other sad story, yesterday we lost a judge, and a Supreme Court judge dies upon return from India. Now, Justice Mohammed Ibrahim, who was admitted as an advocate of the High Court in 1983, was appointed to the top court in 2011. Of course, that's a story on page 12 of the Daily Nation newspaper this particular morning. Let's take a look on that particular story of the slain justice. And Supreme Court Judge Mohammed Ibrahim has died. He passed away in Nairobi yesterday, 2 days after returning from medical treatment in India. Now, a member of Kenya's inaugural Supreme Court bench, he fell ill about 3 weeks ago and was flown abroad for specialized care, as sources said. Now, he was later brought back to Nairobi on Monday and admitted at a city hospital intensive care unit, where he remained until his death. Now, Chief Justice Martha Koome described Judge Ibrahim as a jurist and exceptional humility and integrity in her message of condolences. And Law Society of Kenya also weighed in, and President of the LSK, that is Faith Moni Odhiambo, said, also paid tribute to noting that Judge Ibrahim served with unparalleled grace and distinguished intellect. Of course, we saw even the head of state actually passed on his condolences on his socials, that is his socials on Facebook and as well as on Twitter, right? Of course, may his soul rest in peace. Of course, this comes after Judge Mohammed Ibrahim actually retired in November 2025. That was last month, actually. Of course, our condolences to the family and friends of the late Mohammed Ibrahim, right? To other stories making headlines on matters politics, ODM without Raila, MPs plot defections, and some Orange MPs opposed the outfit working with President William Ruto, including endorsement of his re-election, and others apprehensive about rigged primaries have signaled they will decamp in the run-up to the 2027 general elections. And of course, there are pictures there of Karoli Omondi, who's the MP for Suba South, Edwin Sifuna, who's the Nairobi Senator, and Richard Onyonka, Kisii Senator, Caleb Amisi, Saboti MP, Anthony Kibagendi, Kitutu Church South Member of Parliament, Babu Owino, Embakasi East Member of Parliament, and Mark Nyamita, Uriri Member of Parliament. And that's a story on page 7 of the Daily Nation on matters politics. All right. Now, ODM lawmakers plotting exit before 2027 general elections. And of course, I beg your pardon, you will remember that the party leader of the ODM, that is Oburu Oginga, who took over following the death of his brother and the former party leader, that is Raila Amolo Odinga. Oburu Oginga said that they won't take less than, the deputy president's seat. All right, if they were to support government, they won't take less than a deputy president seat. And of course, we've seen, views from, members of the ODM, some saying. All right, we do apologize for that technical hitch, and we're talking about politics in the ODM, and a number of Orange Democratic Movement, that is ODM lawmakers, plan to ditch the party and seek re-election on other outfits in 2027. Now, at the heart of the possible exodus from the 20-year-old party in a divisive broad-based arrangement between ODM and President William Ruto's United Democratic Alliance, that is UDA, the plan by the party to back President Ruto's re-election has also led to unease. Now, other concerns being cited by the MPs are fears of being shortchanged during the party primaries, political realignments, new and attractive regional parties, and perceived dwindling ODM's influence in strongholds like Gusii and Western. Now, leaders are perceived to be critical of the broad-based government, fear being targeted and denied ODM tickets. Now, Suba South Member of Parliament Karoli Omondi told the Daily Nation that he will seek re-election on a new party, while ODM Secretary General and Nairobi Senator Edwin Sifuna, Kisii Senator Richard Onyonka, MPs Caleb Amisi of Saboti and Anthony Kibagendi of Kitutu Church South insist on seeking to defend their seats on other parties should ODM throw its weight behind President William Ruto. And supporters of the broad-based government, including several party the party members have been rallying ODM-based actions to consider President William Ruto for a second term. Of course, we've seen this actually with some of the ODM members who are actually in government. Those include some of the CSS that are already in government say they will support the UDA regime in 2027, allied to the head of state, that is President William Ruto. And some other members of the ODM say should ODM back Ruto in 2027, that will be the exodus, what the Daily Nation this morning terms as the exodus of the members from ODM. All right, have still days to go. You'll actually see how that will unfold. And of course, now let's talk matters healthcare. And Health Ministry probes Nakuru Hospital over fraud and negligence. Now, the Ministry of Health has launched investigations into the alleged systematic fraud and medical negligence of Sitso Mazolidi Hospital, that is in Nakuru, which follows an expose by NTV last week, which uncovered shocking details of botched surgeries, falsified medical records, negligence, and fraud at the Catholic Church-owned facility. Now, on Wednesday, Head Cabinet Secretary, that is Eden Duale, said that the hospital risks closure should the allegations be proven to be true. Right, and it's quite unfortunate that a Ministry of Health learn of a rogue hospital, quote-unquote rogue hospital, through the media. It's quite unfortunate. And that actually means someone somewhere is not actually doing their jobs. If, some of the things that have unfolded in 2025, we've actually seen that is actually the media that have, come up with these issues, and then, the government pop in and say, and now we're doing investigations, right? Quite unfortunate stories right there. And of course, we, people should actually pull up their socks in their jobs, right? Moving on other matters making headlines in the Daily Nation this particular morning, how, globe-trolling county officials splashed millions on lucrative trips. Now, latest report by the Control of Budget, Margaret Nyakango, shows developed units spent more on foreign and local travels. That's on page 8 of the Daily Nation. Now, let's take a look on how our statesmen, have been spending money on, travel. Now, Kitui, Kajiado, and Kakamega counties are among the biggest spenders on travel by county officials and MCAs, splashing hundreds of millions of shillings on domestic and foreign trips, a new report shows. And according to the latest report by the Control of Budget, Margaret Nyakango, that 6 counties spent more than 500 million Kenya shillings on travel in the first quarter of the 2025 and 2026 financial year, that is July to September 2025. Now, the report shows that county officials preferred foreign destinations and are the United States and the UK and the Middle East, with Tanzania leading with within Africa. Now, Kitui County spent more than 106 million Kenya shillings on domestic travel, with the county assembly counting for 38.57 Kenya shillings, or the million Kenya shillings, and the county executive 68.10 million Kenya shillings. Now, Kajiado County followed closely, spending 89.9 million Kenya shillings, split between the assembly, that is 43.81 million Kenya shillings, and the executive 46.17 million Kenya shillings. Now, foreign travel cost the county 3.49 million, all incurred by the assembly. Now, in Kajiado, 6 assembly officers traveled to Ghana for an Hansard Association conference between August 11th and 16th at a cost of 1.67 million Kenya shillings. I don't know what's your take. You see an MCA, traveling with a motorcade, causing traffic in, major highways here in the country, and it's quite a worrying trend. We've seen, the numbers, millions of shillings, counties spends on travel alone, and we might actually need to look on, these people who are traveling with these sums of money. What have they done in, their jurisdiction of work? That include, the counties, the wards, and whatnot. Of course, it's actually a thing that, they might need to relook at. All right. Now let's take a look on what's making headlines on the Standard newspaper this particular morning. And top story on the Standard newspaper: Trump hits again. Right. And of course, there is a picture there of United States of America president, that is Donald Trump, and Samia Suluhu Hassan, who's the president of Tanzania, and putting Kenya's neighbors on partial restrictions while slamming others with outright entry bans is a blunt signal from President Donald Trump's White House. Now, coming after his harsh rhetoric towards Somalis, it also raises the stakes of Kenya, or for Kenya, even with recent health deals and cordial ties. Nairobi cannot assume it is safe from tougher vetting. Now, with porous regional borders and close interaction with nationals from counties now on Washington's watch list, Kenyans will face heavier scrutiny, more visa denials, and a chill across business and people-to-people links. That's on page 4 of the Standard newspaper. Of course, let's take a look on that particular story. You'll remember when the president of USA, that is Donald Trump, was actually coming in to power. He actually said whatever is happening in America is, may affect whatever is happening in Africa. Now, this was the effects, or the impact of his regime. Now, President Donald Trump on Tuesday signed a proclamation imposing full travel restrictions and entry limitations on 4 more African countries in a move to further tighten immigration controls. Now, the new additions include South Sudan, Kenya's neighbor to the north, and a member of the East African Community. All right. Now, this even as it flags Tanzania for visa overstays and included the country in the list of partial restrictions. Now, this increases the number of countries around Kenya that are facing hostility from the U.S. and could complicate matters for Kenyans eyeing opportunities in the U.S., including trade and business partnerships. Now, other EAC countries on the full restriction list are the Democratic Republic of Congo and Somalia, while Burundi is on the partial restriction list. Now, other African countries in the full restricted list is Burkina Faso, Mali, Niger, and South Sudan, bringing the total number of fully restricted African countries to 12. All right. Now, the U.S. put Tanzania on the list of partial restrictions and entry limitations, joining Burundi with countries which continues to be in the partial restrictions list. Now, Tanzania has been flagged for visa overstays, which comes shortly after the U.S. said it will comprehensively review its ties with following the country's blanched elections in October. Now, the U.S. condemned human rights violations seen in the violence against its otherwise peaceful citizens, which reportedly led to the death of hundreds of people and enforced disappearances. The country also noted that the Tanzanians were violating visa conditions. Right now, Tanzania now falls in the partial restrictions to the U.S. Right, and of course, there are 12 African states on complete ban from doing business and entering the United States of America. That's according to the head of state of the U.S., that is President Donald Trump. He was speaking to reporters after signing the executive orders in the Oval Office of the White House, that is in Washington, D.C. All right. Now let's take a look on other stories making headlines on the Standard newspaper. Also, on page 2 or on page 3, it's actually the story of Justice Ibrahim, who bows out just days shy of his retirement at Apex Court. Now, Supreme Court Judge Mohammed Kandar Ibrahim was days shy of his retirement after he made his final bow at the Aga Khan University Hospital yesterday. Now, the senior judge is said to have passed on at a private hospital that was at 4:30 p.m. after illness. Ibrahim was to leave the Apex Court in 2 weeks' time after a stellar career at the judiciary for the last 23 years. Now, the judge has served 3 Chief Justices after the 2010 Constitution, having been appointed in the first bench of the Supreme Court of Kenya on June 16th of 2011. Now, he alongside Chief Justice Willy Mutunga and Justices Smokin Wanjala, Njoki Ndung'u, Nancy Barasa, Professor Jackton Ojwang, and Philip Tongoi established the foundation of the current court. Now, the Supreme Court judges, representative at the Judicial Service Commission on his practice at Mrs. Waruhio and Muite Advocates under the wings of Senior Paul Muite in 1982. Of course, he was among the first Somalis, to be sworn into the bar. That was in 1982, right? That story is exclusively on page 3 of the Standard newspaper this particular morning. Now, page 2, a story that has been making headlines across newsrooms. Fresh clues after CCTV's autopsy revealed that crash killed Jirongo. Of course, Jirongo was the former member of parliament and a politician, now foreman, who spoke openly about death and repeatedly warned that his life was in danger. The passing of former cabinet Minister and Lugari MP Cyrus Jirongo came laden with intense speculations. With CCTV footage from the crash scene now in public domain and an autopsy conducted in the presence of the pathologist finally unveiled fresh clues and emerged that could offer crucial leads to the ongoing investigations. Now, the CCTV revelations now point out that some investigators call glaring road use violations by both Jirongo and the driver of the bus, which they say could have been avoided. Now, a 3-hour-long autopsy at Lee Funeral Home in Nairobi by Chief Government Pathologist Dr. Johansen Odur and his counterparts, Dr. Bernard Media and Dr. Joseph Ndungu, representing the family, shows that although Jirongo exhibited few injuries externally, severe internal injuries caused his death. All right. Now, the pathologist unanimously concluded that Jirongo died as a result of crash-related injuries to the chest and abdomen, as well as the spinal injuries caused by a blunt force trauma, puncturing earlier assertions by the late Jirongo's friends that the injuries were inconsistent with the cause of death. All right. And we remember when Jirongo actually died on 13th of December. He was involved in a head-on collision accident with a bus. a PSV bus, and that was at 2 a.m. 19 minutes and 18 seconds. Jirongo was captured. That was the time actually he was captured, rejoining the highway, now heading back in the same direction that he came from towards Nairobi, but visibly joining using the wrong lane, right? And according to the first accounts of that particular witness, said there was traffic, right? And the late MP was actually trying to overtake that particular traffic and join his lane in the other end. But at 2 a.m. there was no traffic, and the CCTV footage shows that he joined the wrong lane after exiting the Eagle petrol station that is in Naivasha. All right, and these are contravening accounts of what actually happened, which has drawn speculations. People, friends, and family of the late actually say we've had only one witness account. That was the bus drivers of the coach, and that coach actually carries a number of passengers. We've not heard from a single passenger who was on board on that particular bus. We've only heard from the driver, the only witness, right? Those were some of the speculations which led actually to these post-mortem examinations, which pathologists now say that he died from the injury sustained in the fatal crash in Naivasha. That was on the 13th day of December. That was on Saturday, 2025. Right? That's what's up on that particular story of the late Member of Parliament, Cyrus Jirongo. Right? Now let's take a look on what's making headlines in the corridors of justice. Now, twin court hurdles against president ambitions. Kenya's first world. Of course, this is actually a national issue. We've heard the head of state, that is President William Ruto, say that he wants to take Kenya from a third world country to a first world country, right? And what people may term, what he may term as Singapore, right? Now, President William Ruto may not have his Singapore plans the easy way after a twin challenge of the decision to put up 5 trillion Kenya shillings infrastructure and sovereign funds being filed in court on Wednesday. Now, on one hand, Nakuru-based surgeon Ginyeki Magare, United Kingdom-based human rights defender Eliud Karanja Matindi, Philemon Nyakundi, and the Treasury CS Cabinet, the Treasury Cabinet Secretary, Senate, the National Assembly, and the Control of Budget, arguing that the true funds were illegal and unnecessary. All right. Now, within an hour, Consumer Federation of Kenya filed a separate case claiming that establishing a limited liability company to run the sovereign fund was circumventing oversight and public participation. COFE claimed the move amounted to running government functions outside the constitution. Dr. Ruto claimed he has a plan to put Kenya in the same level as Singapore. Right now, for this sovereign fund, an infrastructure fund was created to allegedly ease countries' thirst for internal and external loans for development. Now, in court, however, the group led by Dr. Magare argued first the infrastructure fund was a threat to equalization fund. They added that the executive had allegedly bypassed parliament while establishing the two funds. Right? And according to them, the Kenya Kwanza administration allegedly created an avenue for private persons to illegally benefit from the coffers. Right? And this is quite an interesting story where things are just being passed. The parliament say these two funds were established. They bypassed parliament while establishing the two funds. And I don't know what's your take on this. You know, things are just being passed. Quite, you know, interesting story right here. And of course, the head of state wants to make Kenya a third world country in what he has been terming as Singapore. Right? That's the story on page 2 of the Standard newspaper. And of course, stories on matters education on page 3, where Uganda Sugar's varsity pay deal as deadline nears. And of course, you remember that the varsity, there has been a varsity crisis in the better part of October and September, October, around 3 months, where the universities were on strike. And of course, they signed a return to work formula. And of course, the Education Cabinet Secretary, that is Julius Migos Ogamba, has reaffirmed that the government will honor its commitment to release funds owed to the university workers with only 2 weeks remaining. And, you know, before the deadline for the payment of the first tranche of the agreed salary arrears. Now, the CS said the resolution signed on November 5th ended the 49-day strike, and that the government would release the outstanding 7.9 billion Kenya shillings as agreed within this financial year. Now, this means that the government has only 2 weeks before settling the 3.9 billion to the university staff. The remaining 3.9 billion Kenya shillings will be paid in July 2026. At the same time, the CS has called on all universities to prepare for the first competency-based education cohort in 2029 through the curricula and infrastructure. Also, during the ceremony, the University of Nairobi conferred 4,504 degrees and diplomas, 48 PhDs, 905 masters, 3,416 bachelors, and 16 postgraduate diplomas. That's a story on page 3 on matters education. Of course, the education sector, the Ministry of Education, has 2 weeks, you know, to heed to the agreement with the university workers. Of course, we've seen the clinical officers have also issued, you know, a strike notice to the Ministry of Health, and that is yet, you know, to be implemented by the Ministry of Health under the leadership of Honorable Aden Duale. Right? That's what's up on matters education on the Standard newspaper. And on matters politics now. Gideon Moi calls for peace amid transnational fights. And of course, we remember that Gideon Moi actually had an tete-to-tete with the head of state. That was actually in November, right? Where that seemed like a political realignments that, you know, the head of state says that he will unify the country regardless of your ethnicity and your affiliations. All right. Also, yesterday, Ruto was actually in the Pingluo Festival, and Ruto bid to win Raila's staff, still on amid jitters. Now, President William Ruto has stepped up his efforts to conquer the late Prime Minister Raila Amolo Odinga, Nyanza's backyard, even as few voices of caution demand elaborate terms of engagement anchored on development for the region. Now, this comes to the fore as thousands of Nyanza residents convened in Rongo for the annual Pingluo Festival, an event dominated by strong political undertones and symbolism pinned on the community's rich cultural history. That's on page 6 of the Standard newspaper this particular morning. All right, now you're up to speed. Those making headlines from 47 counties, and of course what the newspapers has to say this particular morning. Of course, we shall be keeping tabs with these particular developing stories, and of course we shall be bringing you in a subsequent bulletins later on in the day at 1, 4, 7 and 9 p.m. All right, my name is Martin Mashari. That's not to wrap up our program. You've been watching Morning Live, and of course let's meet again later on in the day as we continue keeping you up to speed with those making headlines from across our 47 counties and of course across our borders as far as news is concerned. But until then, let's do this again when God says we do.